That's James's meal. It's a Napa cabbage salad with carrots, walnuts, and blueberry habanero sauce on top, and fried rice with garlic and asparagus and salmon. And he's drinking lavender green tea. He's going to be talking about Bachman's Special Edition and the young Karl Marx. And I'm going to be drinking my hot lemon and honey and apple because I'm not feeling 100% today. Oh boy, I have the light is not great for my camera. We'll see if I can get it better.
Trying to get it in the shade.
There we go. That's not too bad now. Well, I don't know how it would be, but sometimes I get those lines in, and then Kathy tells me
Oh yeah.
poor video quality, so I don't want that. So you go ahead and talk about Bachman, I guess.
Yeah, Bachman and the young Karl Marx. So the young to the old Karl Marx. By 1974, Bachman Turner Overdrive had become one of the biggest bands in the world with classics like Taking Care of Business. Even Elvis was impressed with that.
Who was he?
That's not Elvis Stoico. Maybe he was, but Elvis Presley. And You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet with the starter. Ripped off Velvet Underground's, it's written by Lou Reed, Velvet Underground's Sweet Jane, apparently. The music, not so much the lyrics. This is the story of its founder, Randy Bachman, from this movie, not Sweet Jane. Its founder, Randy Bachman, from his early days as frontman of the Guess Who, I just woke up, with hits such as American Women, to today. He's one of the few legendary artists to reach #1 in 2 separate bands. Yes, it's true. I don't know if Buffalo Springfield reached #1 for what it's worth. Perhaps they deserve to, but definitely Neil Young and Stephen Stills had #1 hits with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Did Neil Young have a #1 hit with Crazy Horse? Maybe. 2 separate bands. Bachman's singular goal of creating music has taken him from spectacular highs to crushing lows. I guess he went broke and worse into debt. And back again. Today he reigns as one, it's not exactly reigning, he's one of the most prolific and iconic artists in the history of Canadian music, featuring interviews with the Bachman's family, not his former wife, not that I saw, featuring interviews with Bachman's family, friends, and fans, including Neil Young. Yeah, Neil Young. I guess Randy Bachman back in the day, they both hail from Winnipeg, though I think Neil Young came from Toronto. Neil Young, Alex Lifeson, who I think was the guitarist with Rush. Peter Frampton, who was with, who was he with? Was he Humble Pie? And then he went solo with Huge Effect. He had a majorly high-selling album. It wasn't that good. In the mid to late 70s, Buffy St. Marie, who actually hailed from the reserve that my sister lived on for some years, if I'm not mistaken, Piaput, northeast Regina, Saskatchewan. Paul Schaefer of Thunder Bay. Paul Schaefer could remember seeing Randy Bachman. He probably saw Neil Young play in the day because it looked like bands would go from Winnipeg to Thunder Bay, the next city down the road. It's a long ways down the road. I don't know, who's this Chris Jericho? I've maybe heard of him. It's country? I don't know. Chris Jericho. I should know. Anyway, special edition for some reason. It has a theatrical trailer.
Did you watch all that?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
Well, you got back and you wanted to...
well, he watched it twice. The movie. Or the...
No, I didn't.
Well, you did. It was on twice.
Was it?
Yeah, it was.
Anyway, maybe I did, but at any rate, it was pretty good. A little short shrift for the Guess Who. One of the things that struck me is that I remember there's a one of the best guitarists in town, electric guitarist here in London. He was broken up with they had a band with a guy who I guess been trained to sing opera or something like that. So he was the singer of the band, and then he was probably one of the better rock singers in Lethbridge. And then a guy, this guitarist that I'm talking about, who's reputed to be the best guitar player in Lethbridge. Well, that sounds like quite a band. But I can remember the guitar complaining about singers. You know, like they just kind of like prima donnas, like Rod Stewart or whatever, Mick Jagger. And he wasn't terribly impressed with singers. I don't think Randy Bachman's terribly impressed with singers. So had trouble with, the first lead singer, who's, I think he was singing lead on Shakin' All Over, way back when, was Chad Allen. And the story goes that Randy Bachman forced Chad Allen out of the group so he could get a young pup called Burton Cummings, who was a lot studdier looking, didn't have glasses for one thing. And boy, he had some pipes. But the story goes that the group fired Randy Bachman. Neil Young was kind of laughing about it in the interview. He said, that's like firing the Guess Who. Because he said Randy Bachman was the Guess Who. And I went, no, not really. I mean, he was a Guess Who maybe to Neil Young. But Neil Young was a pretty good guitar player. It's guitar that he was getting out of the Guess Who. And Neil Young's not a good singer. I wish he'd channel a bit more Burton Cummings or something like that, because Burton Cummings had some pipes. I'm afraid he's a smoker. I don't know if he has quite the same pipes as he had when he was maybe 20 years old, or however. He seemed awfully young when he joined, I guess. But Randy Bachman, they were drifting apart. You know, like the three other guys, by all accounts, wanted to be doing dope and the dope scene, and probably doing groupies and all that sort of stuff. And Randy Bachman was a pretty sensible guy when it came to that. Plus, he'd converted to Mormonism. That didn't last. Probably only lasted maybe 5 years, if right, the first. Maybe it lasted a bit longer. But couldn't have helped it. It was on the road. They were saying they were on the road sometimes at BTO, 330 days a year.
Oh, wow.
Maybe they weren't exaggerating. I mean, that's like country and western kind of levels. That's what country and western folk used to do. I don't know about nowadays. I don't think Shania Twain would have been doing that, and I don't think Taylor Swift does that. Then he goes on to form Brave Belt after he said, I quit the group. You know, they're getting ready to fire him, or they fired. You can't fire me because I've quit. That's the Guess Who. So it goes on about 1971 or something like that, 71. I can remember hearing it. It's called Brave Belt. That's his new group. And he brings back Chad Allen, this guy with the glasses and stuff. Reasonably good pipes. And they're trying to do Buffalo Springfield Poco stuff. Poco wouldn't mean much to any sort of people. But I think it had maybe Richie Fury in it, who was in Buffalo Springfield. So it had steel guitars, and that's kind of what was happening in 71, you know, this kind of country folk kind of thing, revival. Then, somewhere along the line, Chad Allen, the lead singer for Brave Belt, and formerly the lead singer way back when, before Burton Cummings, the Guess Who, he says, I gotta take you out to see this guy live. Hear him sing. He's a bass player. I want you to hear him sing House of the Rising Sun, which Bob Dylan, I think, was the person that started to make it popular in folk circles way back when. It was covered by the Animals, but I think they were kind of trying to channel Dylan. It was covered by Animals maybe 1965, but Dylan had done it maybe 62. I think that's maybe when his first album was. I think it was on that album. And so the person doing this singing is a guy called Fred Turner. Oh, Bachman Turner Overdrive. So all of a sudden, Randy Bachman goes from hearing this, or doing this Poco / Buffalo Springfield kind of shtick, to wanting to rock and roll. And Fred Turner's the guy who, what's the, like the biggest hit seems to have been sung by Randy Bachman for some reason or another. But Turner's the guy that's kind of like growling the vocals. But Turner growls the vocals, and Randy Bachman mews or meows the vocals. And it's like a kitten mewing or meow. Like you ain't seen nothing yet. It kind of works there because the guy's stuttering, right? But the rest of the time it doesn't work. You got these monster chords and stuff like that, and hard rock, and you got him mewing the lyrics. It just doesn't work. Anyway, he wants to move Chad Allen out, and Chad Allen didn't like the heavy sound or whatever, but I would have tried to make it work. I mean, he had the Rolling Stones even. They're doing things like She's the Rainbow, and it kind of sounds like Tinker Toy, Mozart. As Tears Go By, which had, this was way back in the day, maybe 66, it had strings on it and all this sort of stuff. The Beatles, they could rock out, they could do Paperback Writer, and the same time period, they're doing things like Eleanor Rigby and Here, There, and Everywhere. That's more like what the Guess Who was like. They handle a variety of different things. Burton Cummings could sing something like These Eyes. You've even heard These Eyes, right? These Eyes. Yeah. And, it's kind of jazzy, so on and so forth. And Bachman had actually trained himself. I think he was actually trained by Lenny Breau for a while to do jazz. So he could do that jazzy stuff. Burton Cummings could sing it, and yet not at the same time, but the next song could be American Woman, and that's what makes the Guess Who at their best so much better than Bachman Turner Overdrive. But eventually, according to this account, I suspect it's true, Bachman wanted to do more vocals, and he shut Turner aside. Now, Turner's not the best vocalist in the world, definitely not the subtlest. I wouldn't want to hear him singing These Eyes, or laughing, or any number of kind of like melodic, I guess, things. But way better than Bachman. I don't know what Bachman was thinking. Like when you got someone you've got to use the right people in the right places. If you don't have a lead singing voice, don't sing lead. And he went on, he quit that group. It just fell apart. And then he formed another thing with a former lead singer with Trooper. I can't remember the name of the guy. And that one didn't work out. I mean, by that time it was the 80s, and it was a different kind of, people didn't they want to hear synthesizers, so on and so forth. They want to hear distorted electric guitars and stuff like that. So kind of like an object lesson. It's too late, I suspect, for Randy Bachman, but if you're in something that works, and also for Burton Cummings, but maybe he learned, I don't know, don't bust it apart. In terms of sound, in terms of technique, Guess Who was Canada's version of the Beatles. And really, when you look at it, aside from lyrics and like their producer and stuff like that, these guys were better than the Beatles. Guess Who? Not Bachman Turner Overdrive. Burton Cummings had a better voice than Paul McCartney. I'm not even going to mention John Lennon or George Harrison. And I don't know how good he was on the piano. Maybe as good as McCartney. I suspect he was better. Who was the best guitarist for the Beatles? Like George Harrison's an awesome rhythm guitarist. And he ended up being a good, but holy smokes, nothing like Randy Bachman. You hear what I'm saying? And the rhythm section for the Guess Who, yeah, they were Canadian. Well, let me tell you, like when it came to actual chops, Peterson, I'm afraid he could almost win an eating contest with Bachman. He didn't look much like a rock drummer. That's why so often they took pictures of Guess Who with all muffled up in parkas and stuff like that to hide how fat Randy Bachman was, and Peterson. And Jim Cale, No, he wasn't as good a bass player as Paul McCartney, but he was a pretty good bass player. They were better than the Beatles, technically. They didn't have the lyrics. But when you got something that good, you don't bust it apart. What's that about? So they give short shrift to I don't think they even had American Woman in the thing. But maybe they slipped it by. So they just kind of, here's the Guess Who, the early part of the Guess Who, the core albums of the Guess Who. Okay, we're moving on. It's a similar thing with Neil Young. Just basically Buffalo Springfield. What is it about Canadians? This Canadian thing, they're getting ready to do the Johnny Carson show. They've already had a hit with, for what it's worth, Neil Young's a no-show. What? What's that about? And again, the Beatles breaking up. People, Yoko Ono telling Lennon, you can do better without the Beatles. What? Say what? Dump Paul McCartney? No, dump Yoko Ono. How much time?
Lots.
That's what I figured. That's why I was taking time.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the one that I really want to talk about. If you like Guess Who, if you like rock and roll or whatever, or like Randy Bachman, BTO, that might be worth watching. BTO was never my favorite, and Guess Who, the lyrics weren't good enough for me to be my favorite. Incidentally, what was America's answer, in the 60s, late 60s, to the Beatles? Buffalo Springfield. They never made it big, but they're the ones with the talent. Imagine it, 3 guitars up on stage. The L.A. bands and Buffalo Springfield, although they came from elsewhere, including Neil Young, all the way from Toronto, via Winnipeg back to Toronto and Thunder Bay in between and stuff like that. America's answer to the Beatles was, I think, 40 or even 60% Canadian. Neil Young, Bruce Palmer, the bass player, at least the